We're going to bring it from 25% to 50%, the tariffs on steel into the United States of America. Nobody's going to get around that.
You're in the market to purchase a new car, buy one of those that are made by Canadian hands that possibly is made from the steel where I work in my home. So we're Canadian. We'll be proud of it. We don't want to be a 51st state. We're proud of that flag, that leaf.
Canada's steel industry just refused to fold, while the United States' own manufacturing supply chain is quietly paying the price. In this video, we'll show how Ottawa's bold budget moves and strategic pivot are turning a Trump-era tariff blitz into a Canadian comeback story. If you think tariffs are always a win for American industry, think again.
In 2025, U.S. President Donald J. Trump doubled down on his America First trade policy by imposing 50% tariffs on imported steel and aluminum, hitting allies like Canada with the same force as strategic rivals. For Canada, historically America's biggest steel supplier, the blow was severe. Algoma Steel, Stelco, and multiple mid-sized producers faced immediate pressure as the U.S. market, their largest export destination, suddenly became uneconomical. At the same moment, Canada's new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, revealed his first budget, a sweeping industrial plan framed as a generational shift. This budget introduced a $10 billion loan facility to stabilize big manufacturers, a targeted tariff relief program for steel and aluminum, and, most importantly, a clear political declaration. Canada will reduce reliance on U.S. markets and build a self-sustaining industrial base. Meanwhile, the U.S. escalated further by expanding tariffs to more than 400 steel-related product categories, including wind turbines, EV components, and construction inputs. This triggered alarm bells across American industry, with warnings from auto giants, energy firms, and construction associations about rising costs and disrupted supply chains. The dynamic became clear. Trump tightened the screws, Canada adapted, and now the economic consequences are swinging back across the border. The central misconception in Trump's tariff strategy is the belief that the U.S. can raise trade walls without disrupting the tightly woven North American industrial ecosystem it helped build. Canada's steel fight offers a real-time case study in why that belief is flawed. Carney's government moved quickly to reposition steel as a national security asset rather than a simple export commodity. The new budget's Buy Canadian strategy ensures that steel from Sault Ste. Marie, Hamilton, or Regina doesn't sit idle waiting for U.S. political moods. It goes directly into Canada's own bridges, EV plants, naval upgrades, and transmission lines. Steel becomes part of a larger effort to give Canada sovereignty over the materials that power its economy. While Trump's political objective was to protect American steelworkers, the downstream reality is far more complicated. When U.S. automakers see input costs spike, when EV manufacturers delay production schedules, and when energy infrastructure builders report higher bids, the job losses ripple outward. Steel may gain stability in the U.S., but the broader industrial economy absorbs the blow. It's the classic tariff paradox: protect one sector, punish 10 others. Canada, meanwhile, is refusing to play the victim. Ottawa is actively building a domestic steel demand engine that can replace the lost U.S. market. Carney's budget doesn't hide its ambition. Create a Canadian industrial corridor capable of fully supplying the nation's energy transition, housing plan, defense upgrades, and northern infrastructure. That requires millions of tons of steel annually, and Canada plans to produce it internally. Here's the real turning point. Canada is no longer just reacting to tariffs. It is actively redesigning its economy so that U.S. pressure loses leverage. If America wants to weaponize access to its market, Canada will simply reduce its exposure to that weapon. And this shift is already visible. New domestic procurement rules, green steel investments, electric arc furnace conversions, and the rise of long-term Canada First infrastructure planning. Meanwhile, the United States is encountering the uncomfortable reality of tariff-driven inflation. Higher steel prices feed directly into higher auto prices,
higher construction costs, and higher consumer costs. U.S. manufacturers must choose between overpriced domestic steel or tariff-inflated imports. Both options hurt competitiveness. Tariffs may play well at rallies, but they disrupt the backbone industries that actually determine America's economic strength. This leads to a deeper regional paradox. North America was built on integrated supply chains. For decades, steel crossed the border seamlessly, enabling both countries to manufacture at world-class efficiency. Trump's tariffs fracture this integration, and Canada, not the US, is proving more capable of adjusting. And that's what makes this moment historic. Canada is laying the foundation for a more independent industrial identity, while U.S. manufacturers face the destabilizing consequences of their own government's tariff policy. Canada's pivot is not merely defensive, it is transformational. Canada is positioning its steel industry as the anchor of a new national industrial strategy, one that supports everything from the country's clean energy ambitions to its Arctic security posture. In the new budget's fine print, steel is directly linked to hydro dam expansion, offshore wind fabrication, LNG terminal upgrades, EV battery plants, modernized rail corridors, and the mass housing push Ottawa is preparing to launch. That means the steel sector is no longer just reacting to global markets, it is being built into the heart of Canada's long-term economic architecture. In practice, this means a Canadian construction boom powered by Canadian steel, not imported inputs. It means warships built in Halifax with domestic steel plate, transmission towers in Alberta made from domestic beam steel, and Ontario's EV supply chain anchored by Hamilton's green steel transition. Every dollar Canada redirects inward reduces U.S. leverage. Every new domestic contract strengthens the argument that Canada doesn't need to accept economic pressure as the cost of living next to a superpower. Meanwhile, the U.S. is entering a dangerous loop. Tariffs raise costs.
Higher suppress investment costs.
And suppressed investment makes America less competitive globally. Auto companies are already warning that price increases will reduce sales. Construction groups say infrastructure bids are rising. Renewable energy developers report higher steel-intensive project costs, threatening U.S. climate targets. This is the structural weakness Trump's policy never accounted for. America's strength comes from affordable inputs, not artificially inflated ones. Canada's defiance is exposing that flaw. By showing that a middle-power nation can withstand U.S. tariff aggression and even turn it into a growth strategy, Canada is proving something larger about the modern economy. Integration is a strength, but diversification is survival.
And Canada is choosing survival with surprising confidence.
Canada's steel industry is proving something essential. Resilience is engineered, not improvised. Through investment, policy clarity, and strategic redirection, Canada is turning a tariff assault into an industrial pivot. Meanwhile, the United States, the architect of the pressure campaign, is discovering that economic walls cut both ways. So the real question becomes, who is actually winning the steel war? The country adapting or the country reacting? Canada may have already given us the answer.
President Trump announcing a fresh tariff hike on Canada, and it comes after an international spat over Ontario Premier Doug Ford's use of a 1987 Ronald Reagan radio address on tariffs and trade.
Carney says he has a plan.
Building at home, diversifying our trade relationships abroad, and being ready to work with the United States government as and when the time comes.
When President Donald Trump slapped another tariff on Canada, few expected the most powerful response to come in the form of calm. As cameras followed Prime Minister Mark Carney boarding a plane to Asia, he wasn't shouting or retaliating. He simply said that Canada would stay ready to talk when the United States was ready too. In Washington, that quiet tone was almost disarming. Trump had just reignited a feud with Canada after a television ad in Ontario used a 1987 Ronald Reagan speech criticizing tariffs. The American president called it fake, ended trade talks, and added a new round of tariffs. But what was meant to humiliate Ottawa has instead revealed something deeper. Carney's restraint has started to expose the limits of Trump's economic power. The new 10% tariff on Canadian imports halted months of negotiations that were close to producing a steel and aluminum deal benefiting both sides. For many analysts, the move wasn't economic, it was personal. Trump had turned a provincial ad into a political provocation, using his trade authority to punish critics and prove he could still dominate America's allies. Yet, the more he swings that hammer, the weaker it becomes. After nearly a decade of tariff battles, the world has grown used to Trump's volatility. Bloomberg analysts now track each new tariff announcement as a routine event. The same markets that once trembled now simply adjust. Trump's unpredictability, once his greatest weapon, is starting to look like predictability in disguise.
While Trump was reacting to an ad, Carney was redefining the rules of engagement. He told Canadians to focus on what can be controlled, building at home. That message is not passive, it's strategic. Ottawa's 2025 budget commits hundreds of billions to clean energy, advanced manufacturing, and industrial infrastructure. This inward investment has replaced retaliation as Canada's main defense. Provinces like Ontario and Quebec are coordinating to fast-track industrial projects and stabilize supply chains. For foreign investors, that consistency matters. A report by Statistics Canada shows a 14% rise in foreign manufacturing commitments during the first 9 months of 2025, much of it in energy and metals, industries directly hit by U.S. tariffs. Carney's calm, far from weakness, has become a form of economic strength. He is proving that confidence can be louder than confrontation. The breakdown in talks has unexpectedly accelerated Canada's expansion abroad. As Trump closes doors, Ottawa is opening others. Carney's trip to Malaysia for the ASEAN summit marks the start of a larger plan to connect Canadian exports, minerals, technology, and clean energy with Asia's booming economies. Instead of waiting for Washington, Canada is rewriting its playbook. The goal is to anchor its industries to multiple markets, not one. In practical terms, this means securing long-term partnerships in lithium, copper, and renewable components, the same sectors distorted by U.S.-China rivalry. What began as a pause in North American talks is now a structural realignment of Canadian trade strategy. For decades, Canada's prosperity has risen and fallen with America's economic moods. Carney is trying to break that cycle.
Inside the United States, the ripple effects are becoming clear. Farmers and manufacturers, groups central to Trump's political base, are struggling under rising input costs. The National Association of Manufacturers warns that constant tariff shifts are eroding predictability for business operations. Reuters polling in September found support for Trump's trade policy slipping in key farming states, where cross-border exports once sustained local economies. Instead of protecting U.S. jobs, the tariff wars have made planning nearly impossible. The American Chamber of Commerce reported in its September 2025 survey that 62% of mid-size manufacturers delayed or canceled investment decisions due to trade uncertainty. Each new tariff might win headlines, but it costs confidence, and that's the currency every economy depends on. Meanwhile, Canada's tone of stability has made it a magnet for investors seeking predictability. Trump's America First approach, intended to isolate rivals, is slowly isolating America itself.
Trump and Carney both flew to Asia in October, but for entirely different missions. Trump's meetings revolved around confrontation, China, tariffs, leverage. Carney's focus was cooperation, partnerships, trust, and access. In Kuala Lumpur, ASEAN leaders welcomed Canada's outreach. Japanese and Korean officials described Ottawa as a dependable alternative in uncertain times. Even Beijing, locked in trade battles with Washington, has begun portraying Canada as a stabilizer in global supply chains. Chinese media note that Canada's reliability could offset America's volatility. Whether that perception holds or not, it signals something important. The balance of economic credibility is shifting. A few years ago, the idea of Canada standing as a counterweight to U.S. economic power would have seemed unrealistic. Today, it looks entirely possible.
Trump's tariffs were meant to bring manufacturing home and strengthen U.S. leverage. Instead, they are teaching allies how to operate without it. Canada, Japan, South Korea, and the EU are forming new agreements that bypass Washington altogether. The strategy designed to isolate China has gradually isolated the United States. And while Trump's tactics grow louder, Carney's approach grows steadier. His patience has exposed a paradox. The more Washington tries to command loyalty through pressure, the more its partners learn to move independently. The lesson is simple. Power that relies on threats loses value once the threats no longer scare anyone. Carney's restraint has become Canada's strongest weapon, because in this trade war, calm isn't surrender, it's control.
This story began with a commercial and ended as a global turning point. Trump's tariff politics, once a symbol of strength, now reveal the limits of intimidation. Markets no longer fear his tweets. Allies no longer wait for his approval. Carney's response, measured, strategic, quietly confident, has shown that leadership is not about volume but vision. The United States still has enormous influence, but influence without credibility is fragile. In trying to corner Canada, Donald Trump may have cornered America's reputation instead.
Right, both Canada and Mexico want to save North America-wide free trade, but they both know that they can't control what the U.S. does. Now both countries face the renegotiation of the CUSMA Free Trade Agreement next year, so this is a chance to coordinate their negotiating positions and strategies.
Prime Minister Mark Carney has just returned from Mexico City, where he met President Claudia Sheinbaum. The images of the two leaders side by side are more than routine diplomacy. They mark a deliberate attempt to reset a relationship that for years drifted in what analysts call benign neglect. Tensions had even flared when Canadian provincial leaders suggested Mexico was undercutting Canadian workers. For Mexico, that was a slight not easily forgotten. Carney's trip was about repairing that trust, but also about something larger. At a time when the United States under Donald Trump is leaning inward and destabilizing trade with aggressive tariffs, Canada is searching for partners who can help balance the risks. The question is whether this outreach to Mexico can provide a stronger foundation as North America heads toward another round of negotiations.
History shows why this matters. During the last difficult NAFTA negotiations, Mexico quietly shared information with Canadian officials that allowed Ottawa to prepare responses when Trump tried to corner them. That cooperation allowed Canada to secure fairer terms on steel and aluminum tariffs. Fast forward to today, and the playing field looks different. Mexico has been granted a 90-day reprieve on Trump's new reciprocal tariffs. The relief covers cars, steel, aluminum, and copper. Canada did not receive the same treatment. It is a classic divide-and-conquer strategy from Washington, one designed to split partners and test their resolve. Carney's mission in Mexico was therefore not just symbolic. He needed to show that despite past friction, Canada and Mexico can still act as allies when facing the weight of U.S. tariffs.
The talks, however, were not a one-way street. Mexican leaders emphasized that Canadian mining companies must respect strict environmental rules if they want to keep investing. This reminder speaks to long-standing disputes about the impact of Canadian mining operations abroad. Beyond that, Mexico is eager to grow trade flows in both directions and attract more Canadian capital. Both sides are also preparing detailed evaluations ahead of the 2026 review of the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement. That review will determine whether the pact that replaced NAFTA continues in its current form or evolves into something broader. Here lies a key opportunity. Canada and Mexico are both members of the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. That membership allows them to coordinate on exports to Asia-Pacific markets, something the United States cannot do. By pooling production capacity and leveraging trade access beyond North America, the two countries could increase competitiveness at a moment when global supply chains are being reshaped.
The contrast across the continent is striking. In the United States, the economy is showing signs of strain. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the unemployment rate climbed to 4.3% in August 2025, the highest since 2021. On September 17, the Federal Reserve cut its benchmark interest rate to a range of 4 to 4.25%, citing a weakening labor market. Economists warn that a combination of slower job growth and persistent tariff costs could tip the U.S. towards stagflation. Canada faces challenges of its own. Statistics Canada reported the GDP contracted by 1.5% in the second quarter of 2025, and unemployment reached 7.1% in August. Yet Ottawa is pursuing a different strategy. Carney is betting that by tightening economic ties with Europe and Mexico, Canada can diversify trade, reduce vulnerability, and attract new investment. The takeaway is clear. The United States is wrestling with policy uncertainty and the risk of recession, while Canada is trying to build resilience through diplomacy. Carney's meetings in Mexico City were not simply photo opportunities. They were part of a calculated effort to secure allies before the difficult USMCA review begins in 2026. Whether this approach succeeds will depend on how much Canada and Mexico can align their interests. But in a time of volatility, even modest steps toward cooperation may give Canada a stronger footing in North America's shifting landscape.